Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to picture the scene. It is the year 1298.
Right?
And we are not in a palace. We are not on some grand ship. And we are definitely not in a library. We are in a damp, probably rat-infested prison cell.
In Genoa, Italy. And it's grim.
Totally grim.
I mean, Genoa and Venice are the two great maritime superpowers of the Mediterranean, and they are constantly at each other's throats.
Okay.
And there's just been this massive naval battle, the Battle of Cursula, and thousands of Venetians are now prisoners of war, just rotting in Genoese jails.
And sitting there in one of those cells is this one specific prisoner. He's 44 years old. He's a Venetian commander, but more than anything else, he's just bored out of his mind.
Completely miserable, stuck in this box.
So he starts talking. He starts telling stories to his cellmate just to pass the time.
And this isn't just any cellmate. This is, I mean, it's a stroke of absolute literary destiny, or maybe just the weirdest luck in history. The man sharing his cell is Rustichello da Pisa. And Rustichello isn't a soldier or a merchant. He's a professional writer.
A novelist, basically.
A writer of romances. Specifically, we're talking King Arthur, Lancelot, knights and damsels in distress. That's his whole thing.
It is the ultimate odd couple. You've got this gritty, world-weary adventurer who has seen the literal edge of the known world.
And you've got the fantasy novelist who is always looking for his next bestseller.
Exactly. So the adventurer starts spinning these wild yarns about a golden empire on the other side of the planet, about black stones that burn like wood, about money made from paper.
About unicorns, which were probably rhinoceroses, but still.
Right. And the writer just goes, wait, hold on. Let me get a quill. I need to write this down.
And that collaboration, that prison cell brainstorming session, it creates arguably the most famous and certainly the most controversial travelogue in human history.
We are talking, of course, about Marco Polo.
The man himself.
But here's the thing, and this is why I'm so excited for today's deep dive. When most people hear Marco Polo, what do they even think of?
A pool game?
A children's pool game. Marco? You close your eyes and you splash around. Or, if they're a bit more informed, they think, oh, that's the guy who brought pasta to Italy.
Ugh, the pasta myth. We will definitely have to have a serious talk about that later.
Oh, we will. Spoiler alert. He didn't. But the real story is so much more, I don't know, Indiana Jones than that.
He really is.
It's a story about a 17-year-old kid crossing the Gobi Desert, becoming a spy and a trusted advisor for the most powerful emperor on earth, Kublai Khan, and then coming home to a Europe that basically didn't believe a single word he said.
And that disbelief, that's really the core of our mission today, isn't it?
It is.
We aren't just here to retell the adventure story. We're here to investigate it. We're looking at the primary source, the manuscript we call Il Milione, or the Travels of Marco Polo, and we're stacking it up against modern archaeology, Chinese economic records, and all the historical contexts to answer that one huge question.
Did he actually go?
Did he actually go? Because for centuries, people have called him a liar.
Milione, the million lies.
Exactly. They've said he never made it past, Constantinople or the Black Sea, that he just sat in a trading post drinking wine and copying stories from Persian guidebooks he bought off some other merchant.
Which is such a wild accusation. I mean, imagine faking a 24-year road trip. That is a long con.
It's a very long con, but the skepticism is understandable, He was describing a civilization that was, in many ways, centuries ahead of 13th century Europe. It sounded impossible. Paper money. A postal service that could cross a continent in days. It was science fiction to them.
So for this deep dive, we're going to look at the skeptic's case because there are some legitimate questions. But we're also going to look at the hard data.
The boring stuff.
The really boring stuff, yeah. The details about salt taxes and currency exchange rates that, it turns out, might be the smoking gun that proves he was telling the truth all along.
It's a detective story as much as it is a travel story.
Absolutely. But to really get it, to understand Marco and why he was even in a position to take this incredible journey, you have to go back a generation. This wasn't a solo mission.
Not at all. This was a family business.
So let's get into section 1. The origin story. Because Marco wasn't even the first Polo to meet the great Khan. His dad and his uncle were the OGs here.
Niccolo and Maffeo Polo. And these guys were the real deal. When we say merchants in the 13th century, we don't mean guys running a little corner store.
No.
We mean high-stakes venture capitalists. We mean geopolitical analysts. We mean explorers. Before Marco was even born, around 1254, These two are already operating out of Constantinople.
And they were incredibly savvy, right? I read somewhere that they made a brilliant business move just before everything went south.
Extremely savvy. So they were living in the Latin quarter of Constantinople, but they had their ear to the ground. They could feel the political winds shifting. A regime change was coming. The Greeks were about to retake the city.
And if that happened, being a Venetian there would be a very bad thing.
A very bad thing. You'd likely be blinded, imprisoned, or killed. So in 1260, they do something brilliant. They liquidate all their assets, houses, warehouses, stock, everything, and they convert it all into jewels.
Portable wealth. That's so smart. You can't run with a warehouse full of timber, but you can definitely sew a fortune in rubies into the lining of your coat.
Exactly. High value, low volume. They take these jewels and head east, deeper into the Mongol territories, to trade. But then local wars break out behind them, cutting off their return route.
So they're stuck.
They're stuck. So they just keep going east. The only way out is through. They end up in Bukhara, in modern-day Uzbekistan, and just stay there for 3 years, learning the local languages, doing business.
And that's where they get an invitation they can't refuse.
An envoy from Kublai Khan finds them and says, the great Khan has never met any Latins before. He wants to see you. So they travel with this envoy all the way to the Khan's court.
And Kublai's just fascinated by them.
Absolutely fascinated. Remember, he's the grandson of Genghis Khan. He's ruling this immense empire. He's curious about everything. He asks them about their kings, their legal systems, how they fight wars, and most importantly, about their religion, about the Pope.
This is the part that always gets me. The Mongols were so pragmatic about religion, weren't they? It wasn't about faith. It was about, like, collecting sources of power.
It was. Kublai basically wanted to know if the Christian god had any juice he could tap into. So he gives Niccolo and Maffeo a mission. He sends them back to Europe as his ambassadors.
And he has a very specific shopping list.
A very specific one. He says, go back to your Pope and bring me 100 educated Christians.
100. He wanted a whole academic exchange program.
He wanted men acquainted with the 7 arts who could argue logically that Christianity was the best religion. He wanted scientists, theologians, engineers, and as a bonus, he asked for a vial of oil from the lamp of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem.
So Niccolo and Maffeo, being good merchants who want to keep the most powerful man in the world happy, they say, sure thing, boss, and they trek all the way back.
They get back to Venice around 1269, and Niccolo finds out his wife has died in his absence. But he also finds out he has a son he has never met, a 15-year-old kid named Marco.
Imagine that first meeting. Hi, son. I'm your dad. I've been in Mongolia for your entire life. Now pack a bag, kid. We're going back.
But they hit a huge snag almost immediately, what historians call the Pope problem.
Oh, right. The longest game of musical chairs in the history of the Vatican.
Pretty much. Pope Clement I had died in 1268. The Polos arrived back in Europe in 69 expecting to meet the Pope, get the letters, get the 100 men, and go. But the cardinals can't agree on a successor.
There's this massive political infighting.
And it drags on. This becomes the longest sede vacante, the longest period without a pope in the history of the church. The Polos are stuck in Italy, just waiting.
For 2 years. Can you imagine the frustration? They're holding the golden ticket to the biggest market in the world, and they're stuck in a waiting room because of Vatican politics.
Finally, in 1271, they just give up. They say, we can't wait anymore. The Khan will think we're liars. So they decide to head back on their own.
And they take 17-year-old Marco with them.
They do manage to get some official letters from a papal legate in Acre named Teobaldo Visconti, who wishes them well, and they even convince 2 Dominican friars to come along as a sort of down payment on the 100 men Kublai asked for.
Yeah, this is a bit of a downgrade, isn't it?
Yeah.
We couldn't get you 100 PhDs, but here are 2 friars.
And it gets even worse. As soon as their little caravan hits a war zone in the Near East, there was a Mamluk invasion going on, the 2 friars get terrified.
They bail.
They completely bail. They hand the papal letters back to the Polos and say, nope, we're out. They just run back to the coast.
So much for the great missionary expedition. So now it's just the 3 of them, Niccolo, Maffeo, and teenage Marco, setting out on this insane journey.
And it is insane. It's not a luxury cruise. They sail to Acre, then they ride camels down to Hormuz on the Persian Gulf.
The plan was to sail to China from there, right?
That was the plan. But when they get to Hormuz and they actually see the ships, Marco is horrified.
He calls them wretched. He says they were built without nails, just stitched together with coconut fiber twine.
And they were covered in pitch, but they had no decks. They were just open to the elements. He looks at these things and basically says, there is no way I'm getting on one of those death traps.
So they decide to walk.
They decide to take the overland route, the Silk Road, through Persia, Afghanistan, over the Pamir Mountains, the roof of the world, and across the Gobi Desert.
And this is incredibly dangerous. I mean, we're talking about bandit country.
Oh, yeah. Marco himself writes about an attack. They were in a sandstorm, and a band of robbers, he calls them marauders, attacked their caravan in the confusion.
And he says they only escaped because of the dust and the dark. They managed to get away to a nearby town, but many of the people traveling with them were killed or enslaved.
This is his education. He's a young man, barely out of his teens, and he's seeing people murdered and sold into slavery right in front of him. This is what forges him.
It takes them 3.5 years to get to Kublai Khan's court.
3.5 years. He leaves Venice a boy of 17. He arrives in China, a man of 21. He has grown up on the road.
And when they finally arrive at the summer palace in Chengdu, the legendary Xanadu Marco isn't just some merchant's kid anymore. He's a survivor. He's worldly.
Which is the perfect lead-in to Section 2, life in the court of the Khan.
This is where the story really takes off, because Kublai Khan seems to just immediately take a shine to Marco, right? There's this incredible bromance that develops. Why? What did the Khan see in this Venetian kid?
I think it's a combination of things. First, you have to understand the political context. Kublai was a Mongol ruler trying to govern a massive ancient Chinese civilization.
And he didn't really trust the local Chinese officials.
Not entirely. The Chinese scholar bureaucrats, the literati, their loyalty was always complicated. Their first loyalty was to Chinese culture, not necessarily to their Mongol conquerors. So Kublai had a policy of appointing foreigners to high positions.
The perfect independent contractor.
Yeah.
No local ties, no family allegiances.
Exactly. Their only loyalty was to him, the man who gave them their power. And Marco fit that bill perfectly. But he also had a specific skill set. Languages. The text says he knew 4 of them. We're not sure which ones, but probably Persian, which was the lingua franca of the Silk Road, and Mongolian, maybe some Turkic languages.
Interestingly, not much Latin. And it's debated if he ever really learned to read Chinese characters.
Right, but he could communicate verbally with almost anyone in the vast multicultural empire. And this made him incredibly useful to the Khan.
So Kublai starts sending him out as his personal emissary, his special envoy.
He does, but there's another reason Kublai liked him so much. It was Marco's personality.
He wasn't boring.
He wasn't boring. Marco noticed that when other officials returned from missions, they'd give these dry, bureaucratic reports. The tax revenue from this province is X, the rice harvest was Y.
Snooze fest.
Kublai was bored stiff. He wanted to know about his empire. What do the people do? What are their strange customs? What weird animals live there?
So Marco becomes a storyteller. He becomes a journalist. He goes on these missions to what is now Myanmar, India, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, and he comes back with fascinating details.
He comes back with stories. He entertained the Khan. He made himself indispensable, not just as an administrator, but as the emperor's eyes and ears on the strange and wonderful fringes of his own domain.
And this brings us to the marvels. The stuff he saw that just must have blown his European mind.
It's like a 13th century man visiting the 21st century. The technological and social gap was immense.
Let's start with the big one, paper money.
This is huge. For a European, money was gold or silver. It had to have intrinsic value. A coin was worth the metal it was made from.
Right.
Marco gets to China and sees people using pieces of paper made from the bark of the mulberry tree as currency. He describes the whole process in incredible detail.
Like how they stamp it with the Khan's vermilion seal.
Exactly. And how, if it gets worn out, you can trade it in for a new one. To him, it was like alchemy. He understood that the Khan's authority was so absolute that he could literally create value out of thin air. It was a level of centralized economic control that Europe wouldn't see for centuries.
And then there's the black stones that burn. He sees people digging these black rocks out of the ground and using them for fuel. He writes they burn better than wood and hold a heat all night.
And again, you have to put yourself in his shoes. Venice was powered by wood. China had such a large population that they had a deforestation problem even back then. Coal was the solution. It powered their public bathhouses, their industries. Marco saw it as a miracle.
He also marveled at the postal system.
The Yam. It was basically the Mongol Pony Express, but on a continental scale.
Relay stations every 25 or 30 miles with fresh horses ready to go.
He said there was something like 200,000 horses dedicated to the system. A message could travel hundreds of miles in a single day. For a merchant like Marco, who was used to information traveling at the speed of a donkey, this was revolutionary.
Okay, so he's describing all this amazing and accurate stuff, but we have to address the elephants in the room. Or maybe the Mongols in the room.
The errors and exaggerations, yes. This is where the skeptics start to sharpen their knives.
The big one is the siege of Shangyang.
It is. In the book, Marco, or Rustichello, claims that the Polos were instrumental in helping the Mongols win this long, drawn-out siege.
The story is that they introduced the Mongols to European-style catapults, these giant mangonels that could throw huge stones and break down the city walls.
It's a great story. It makes the Polos look like war heroes, like military geniuses. But the timeline is completely wrong. The siege of Xianyang ended in 1273.
And we know Marco and his family didn't arrive in China until 1274 or 75.
He missed it by at least a year. And we know from very specific Chinese and Persian records that the engineers who built those siege engines for the Mongols were actually Persians named Ismail and Ala al-Din, not Niccolo, Maffeo, and Marco Polo.
So was he just lying?
Oh.
Or was it, an embellishment?
It's probably an embellishment. Maybe his father and uncle had offered some advice during their first trip, or maybe it was a story he heard and just inserted his family into it to make them sound more important. This kind of self-aggrandizement is pretty common in medieval travel writing.
Then there's the other big claim, that he was the governor of the city of Yangzhou for 3 years.
Yeah, that one's almost certainly a mistranslation or an exaggeration. The text says he ruled the city. But there is absolutely no record of a foreigner named Polo in the very detailed Chinese administrative lists of governors for that period.
So what was he doing there?
He was probably there, and he likely held a position of some importance. The current theory is that he worked in the salt monopoly.
The salt tax.
A huge source of revenue for the empire. So a significant job, yes. A powerful official, maybe. But the actual governor of a major Chinese city, almost certainly not.
Okay, so he's maybe puffing up his resume a little bit. We've all done that. But he did stay for 17 years. That's a huge chunk of his life.
It's a lifetime. And eventually they start to getting nervous. Kublai Khan is getting old. He's in his late 70s. He's suffering from gout. He's drinking heavily. His health is failing.
And the Polos know that their special protected status comes from him personally.
Right. If he dies, his enemies at court, the ones who resent these privileged foreigners, might turn on them. They could lose their fortune or even their lives. They need an exit strategy.
But Kublai won't let them go. He likes them too much. He's like that boss who won't let you quit because you're the only one who knows how to fix the printer.
He keeps saying no until a perfect opportunity arises. And this brings us to Section 3, the long way home.
This is such a great setup. It's like something out of a movie. A Mongol princess, Kukuchin, needs an escort.
She needs to be sent from China to Persia to marry the ruler there, the Ilkhan Argun. But the overland route, the Silk Road, is blocked by wars between different Mongol factions. It's too dangerous.
So they have to go by sea.
And who are the most experienced sailors in the Mongol court?
The Venetians.
The Venetians. Kublai finally relents. He realizes this is the safest way to get the princess to her destination, and it's a way to grant the Polos' wish. So he gives them a fleet of 14 massive Chinese junks.
This is around 1291. They set off on this epic sea voyage.
And it is absolutely terrifying. The journey takes 2 years. They sail through the South China Sea. They get held up in Sumatra for months waiting for the monsoons to change. They cross the Indian Ocean.
The death toll is just staggering. Marco says that 600 people started the voyage, not including the regular crew.
This is the princess's entourage, the ambassadors, the servants.
And by the time the fleet finally reaches Hormuz in Persia 2 years later, only 18 of those passengers are still alive.
18 out of 600. It's a horror story at sea. Disease, storms, scurvy, maybe pirate attacks. We don't know the details. But the 3 Polos, Niccolo, Maffeo, and Marco, they all survive.
They are just indestructible.
They deliver the princess. Fun fact, the guy she was supposed to marry had actually died while they were at sea, so she ends up marrying his son instead. And then the Polos finally make their way back to Venice.
They arrive in 1295. They've been gone for 24 years, and there's this fantastic legend about their return, isn't there?
Oh, it's a great story. They show up at the family home, and they look like hobos. They're dressed in these ragged Mongol clothes. They speak Venetian with a funny accent. Their own relatives don't recognize them.
They think they're imposters.
They do. So the Polos, to prove who they are, throw this huge banquet. And at the end of the meal, they bring out their tattered traveling coats, take knives, and rip open the seams.
And out pours a river of gemstones. Rubies, sapphires, diamonds, emeralds. The fortune they'd sewn into their clothes before they left China.
It's the most Venetian way to prove your identity imaginable. Look at my net worth.
We're back, baby. But Marco's adventure isn't over, because just a few years after he gets home, he's back in trouble.
Venice goes to war with Genoa again. Marco, now a wealthy and experienced man, commands a galley in the Venetian fleet.
He probably paid for it himself with those gems.
Very likely. And he gets captured. And he ends up right back where we started our story, in that Genoese prison cell.
With Rustichello da Pisa.
And we really have to talk about Rustichello, because he is the filter through which we get this entire story. He's the co-author.
Romance novelist.
We're a romance novelist who writes in a sort of Franco-Italian dialect, the language of chivalry and courtly literature.
So you have Marco, the pragmatic merchant, dictating his story.
Probably in very dry terms. The city of Suzhou has 6,000 bridges. They produce much silk.
And Rustichello sitting there thinking, this needs more flair, this needs more drama.
Exactly. He's spicing it up. The opening of the book, the prologue, is lifted almost directly from one of Rustichello's King Arthur novels. He addresses emperors and kings, dukes and marquises. He's setting a very specific romantic tone.
It's a marketing tactic. He's packaging Marco's travelogue like a bestseller.
He is. And it worked. The book became a sensation. It was copied by hand and translated into numerous languages. It was the most influential account of the East for centuries. But because of Rustichello's style and because the content was so unbelievable, many people just assumed it was fiction.
They called it Il Milione.
Which brings us right to the heart of it. Section 4, the deep dive. Did he actually go?
Because even today, there are respected scholars like Francis Wood who wrote a whole book arguing that he probably didn't.
Right. So let's lay out the skeptic's case. It's compelling, and it relies heavily on omissions, the things Marco didn't mention.
Okay, what's Exhibit A?
The Great Wall of China.
I mean, that's a big one. It's the most famous landmark in the country. How do you spend 17 years in China and not notice the Great Wall?
A very fair question. Then there's T. He's there for nearly 2 decades and never once mentions the national drink.
Or chopsticks, how people eat.
Or footbinding, the custom of binding women's feet to keep them small. Or even in Chinese writing. He talks about languages, but he never describes the character-based writing system. The skeptics say these omissions are just too glaring.
So what's their theory? That he just got as far as a trading post on the Black Sea and cobbled the rest together from stories he heard from Persian merchants?
That is precisely the theory. That he was a great listener, but not a great traveler.
Okay, so let's hear the rebuttal, because this is where it gets really, really interesting, the aha moments. Let's start with the wall.
The Great Wall, the massive stone fortification that we see on postcards today, snaking over the mountains, that was built by the Ming Dynasty.
Which came after the Mongols were kicked out.
Centuries after Marco Polo, in Marco's time during the Mongol-Yuan Dynasty, the wall was mostly a collection of much older, dilapidated earthworks, mounds of dirt.
And more importantly, the Mongols controlled the territory on both sides of it.
Exactly. It had no military or strategic purpose anymore. It was a ruin. So he didn't mention it because it wasn't the Great Wall yet. It just wasn't that impressive.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. 1 point for Marco. What about footbinding?
2 things on that. First, footbinding was a custom primarily of the Han Chinese elite. Marco spent most of his time in the Mongol court and with other foreigners. The Mongols did not practice footbinding. In fact, they thought it was grotesque.
So he was kind of in a social bubble. He was hanging with the ruling class, not necessarily observing all the customs of the conquered people.
He was. But here's the crucial part. In one of the alternate manuscripts of his book, the Toledo manuscript, he does make a comment about the dainty walk of Chinese women, noting how they take very tiny, mincing steps.
So he saw the result, even if he didn't understand or describe the cause.
Precisely. He noticed the effect. Okay, what's next? Tea.
Tea.
That one's a bit trickier. Tea was certainly popular in southern China, but in the north, in the Mongol court, their preferred drink was kumis, which is fermented mare's milk.
Yeah.
It's an acquired taste. And interestingly, other European travelers of that era who definitely went to China, like the missionary Odoric of Pordenone, also fail to mention tea. It's a weir omission for all of them, but it's not a smoking gun against Polo specifically.
Okay, so we've defended against the emissions, but you mentioned there's killer evidence, positive proof that he was there.
Yes. And this comes from the work of the German sinologist Hans Ulrich Vogel, who decided to ignore the adventure stories and focus on the boring stuff.
The numbers, the economics.
Exactly. The stuff Rustichello probably wanted to cut out of the book. Marco describes, in painstaking detail, the production of salt in various parts of China. Salt was a state monopoly and a massive source of revenue for the Khan.
Okay.
He provides specific figures on the revenues from the salt tax in cities like Chonglu and Yangzhou. He describes the specific shapes and sizes of the paper money and the official seals used on them. He talks about the exchange rates between paper money and cowrie shells used as currency in the province of Yunnan.
These are very, very specific details.
Incredibly specific, and here's the bombshell. When Vogel compared Marco's figures and descriptions to internal Yuan dynasty administrative documents, Chinese government records that were unknown in the West until the 20th century, they matched. The numbers lined up. He knew things about the internal administration of the salt monopoly that no foreign merchant just passing through could possibly have known. You couldn't get this information from a Persian guidebook. You had to have been there, on the inside, talking to the officials who ran the system.
That gives me chills. That's the receipt. That's the proof of purchase for the whole trip.
It is the strongest piece of evidence we have. It's what has convinced most modern historians.
Is there anything else? Any mention of him in the Chinese records?
There is a tantalizing clue. The official history of the Yuan dynasty mentions a court official by the name of Buluo.
Polo. Buluo. Close enough.
It's a plausible Chinese transliteration. For a long time, scholars dismissed it as a common Mongol name. But recently, research has shown that this particular Buluo was involved in an incident and was moved to different posts at dates that align surprisingly well with Marco Polo's own accounts of his movements.
So it could be him?
It could be him. It's not definitive proof, but it's another piece of the puzzle that fits.
Okay. So the verdict from the historical community today is he went.
Overwhelmingly, yes. The consensus is that he went. He may have exaggerated his own importance, and his storyteller may have added some flair, but the core of the journey is true. He was there.
Which brings us to our last section, legacy, myths, and Il Milione. We've established he went, but we still need to bust that big myth we mentioned at the start.
The pasta myth. Let's do it.
I feel like we're about to break a lot of Italian grandmothers' hearts. Marco Polo did not bring pasta to Italy.
He did not even close. We have legal documents from Italy from the 12th and early 13th centuries, before Marco was even born, that mention pasta. The Arabs introduced durum wheat and the technique of making dried pasta to Sicily centuries earlier.
And in his own book, when Marco describes a noodle-like food he saw in China, he compares it to lasagna, which shows he already knew what that was.
He knew what it was. He wasn't introducing a new concept.
So where did this story come from? Why does literally everyone believe this?
You're not going to believe this. It was an advertisement. Yes. In the 1920s, a trade publication in Canada called the Macaroni Journal ran a feature story to popularize pasta. They invented the story of Marco Polo discovering noodles and bringing them back to Italy. It was pure marketing.
That is incredible. A piece of 1920s ad copy became one of the most famous facts in food history.
And it stuck. But his real legacy, his real impact is so much bigger than noodles. It's about exploration.
It's the maps.
It's the maps. Before Polo, European maps of Asia were filled with fantasy. Here be dragons, the Garden of Eden, the lands of Gog and Magog.
Biblical stuff.
Right. Marco provided data. He gave place names, distances, descriptions of trade routes. This information was incorporated into world maps like the Fra Mauro map, which fundamentally changed how Europeans saw the world.
And it directly inspired a certain Genoese sailor about 200 years later.
Christopher Columbus.
Yeah.
Columbus owned a personal, heavily annotated copy of Marco Polo's book. We still have it. It's in a museum in Seville, and the margins are filled with his handwritten notes.
He was obsessed. He wasn't looking for a new world. He was looking for Cathay. He was looking for the land of the great Khan that Marco described.
He was. When Columbus landed in Cuba, he thought he was in Japan. He was carrying a letter from the King and Queen of Spain, addressed to the great Khan. He was asking the native people where he could find the golden-roofed palaces of Quinzai.
He thought he was walking into Marco Polo's book.
He did. So you can draw a direct line. A prisoner's stories, written down by a romance novelist, inspire the voyage that leads to the European discovery of the Americas. Without Polo, the Age of Discovery would have looked very, very different.
That is a massive butterfly effect.
It connects the whole world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the big takeaway here?
I think it's about how we understand truth in history. Marco Polo was a merchant, not a historian. He was pragmatic. He saw the world in terms of products, logistics, and profit.
But his story was told by a writer who was looking for flair, for romance, for a good yarn.
And you get this hybrid of hard fact and fantastic storytelling. For centuries, people focused on the flair and called him a liar. But now, with modern tools, we can dig underneath the story and see the bedrock of truth. He really was a witness to a world that Europe couldn't even comprehend.
I have one final thought, a final piece of evidence I found that I think is just the coolest, most poetic proof that he was there.
Go for it.
The sack-shaped star.
Ah, yes. Pietro de Bano.
Exactly. So after Marco gets back to Venice, he has a conversation with this well-known philosopher and astrologer, Pietro de Bano. And in this conversation, Marco describes the sky as he saw it from the southern hemisphere, probably when his ship was near Sumatra.
A sky that is completely invisible from Europe.
Totally invisible from Venice. And he draws a picture for Pietro of something he saw. He describes it as being shaped like a sack with a large tail.
And astronomers have looked at this.
And they've realized he was almost certainly describing a comet that was seen in China and Indonesia in 1293. A comet that was not visible from Europe. He also describes what we now call the Magellanic Clouds, those dwarf galaxies you can only see from the south.
And this detail is not in his book.
That's the key. It's not in the book. He wasn't bragging about it to sell copies. It was just a quiet conversation he had with a scientist. Hey, you know, the sky looks different down there.
It's the casual, unsensationalized detail that rings the most true.
For me, that's the final proof. It's the detail he didn't embellish that proves he went the distance. He didn't just see a different part of the earth. He saw a different part of the sky.
And that is the perfect place to leave it. History is a puzzle. It's about sources and translation and perspective, and sometimes you have to look at the star charts to find the truth.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.